Perhaps closest to the truths of the universe as we spacefarers see it is encountered in the form of the mysterious beings that we know as the Starborn. Ascendant beings that appear to be human, but are definitely something else entirely. In this video, we'll be examining the lore and nature of the Starborn. There will be spoilers, including references to other questlines, and if you're interested in other lore videos for Starfield, or even other games, definitely subscribe to the channel. And as always, if you're ever hungry for more Starfield information, you can visit my partner, starfieldwiki.net, run by the team behind UESP. To begin this examination of the Starborn, we must start with their physiology and other physical aspects that should give us some clues as to what they really are. Based on our experiences as a Starborn, should we choose to become one after entering through the Unity, or what can be roughly summed up as a center of the multiverse, we know Starborn bleed. As with the other hostile Starborn we encountered during our journey throughout the settled systems. This of course means for the circulation of blood to occur, there has to be a heart. An internal organ system also suggests that Starborn still need sustenance of some sort. It's unknown exactly how much calories or how much water need to be consumed by a Starborn for them to keep functioning. When we do visit the location of Pilgrim's Rest in our original starting universe, we can find littered remnants of food and chunks by the previous occupant, Keeper Aquilus, which may indicate that a Starborn does need at least some calories to continue living. Based on the Starborn ability to produce or manipulate oxygen, Starborn still do need oxygen to breathe and the protection of their Starborn spacesuits against space radiation, poisonous fumes, and other sources of environmental harm. Noel's observation of Starborn physiology is as follows.
Even the trace physiological and neurological readings I'm able to pick up from you are unprecedented. You really are something.
We know that Starborn can live for what is assumed to be an indefinite period of time once we take into account a hunter's recollection of his time on pre-23rd century Earth and the obvious longevity displayed by Keeper Aquilus. This biological immortality seems to be granted by entering through the Unity at least once, and it seems gaining or enhancing Starborn powers and repeatedly going through the Unity rejuvenates the physical welfare of Starborn. Whenever we are asked by Constellation members how we're feeling after interacting with the temples and the artifacts, a lot of our dialogue options include telling them that we feel really great, or even better than before. As discussed, Starborn do tire and can also get injured, as even after becoming Starborn, we can still fracture our limbs, get hypothermia, become sick, and so on. Assumingly, this means Starborn, while they may be biologically immortal, at least in terms of age, is still susceptible to fatal injuries, ergo they are potentially immortal, but not invulnerable. When we are killed or witness the deaths of other Starborn, instead of a corpse being left behind, the bodies instead turn into what seems to be starlight and maybe figurative dust. This is somewhat backed up by the dialogue hostile Starborn yell out when they say they'll turn you into dust. But what happens after the physical death of a Starborn? This part is a mystery, but one can make some assumptions based on the clues we can observe or find in Starfield. If we take into consideration that the Pilgrim, the Emissary, and the Hunter is meta-commentary on player behavior, for example, I'm sure many of you have noticed you exhibit the attitudes and behaviors of those three Starborn identities playing multiple New Game Pluses, they are also by extension representative of us players and the game system, meaning the death of a Starborn could lead to them rubber-banding back to their previous save point. What that save point may be is up for speculation. Or, Starborn really can just die and cease to exist, at least in their current form, if we were to take hostile Starborn telling us that our infinity ends, literally, or perhaps Starborn return to becoming a part of the Unity, which we'll discuss at some length later in the video. A person in the Starfield Wiki Discord server had a question in regard to this aspect of the Starborn that I'm sure many of you also have at this point. So, are Starborn connected to their other selves in some way, or immortal? The Hunter talks like he has been killed by the Emissary a few times and remembers it. Also, the random Starborn attackers seem pretty suicidal. In response, I answer with the following, but by no means are my answers definitive, and at best, speculation. First, whichever version of the Emissary or Hunter you meet is the surviving one that has accumulated a good amount of experience going through many variations of what happened or could happen, so they just know what may happen or did happen. As the Unity explains in regards to the non-linearity of time and the nature of existence, everything can or can't be everything at the same time. It's implied each action, decision, death creates a new universe or timeline, which means more versions of the Starborn that come across what they haven't yet experienced or know about, and they carry that knowledge into the next instance, considering they don't age the same way humans do. We don't really know if Starborn actually die the way we think of an organism or human dying. The Unity mentions we have to leave a part of ourselves in the previous universe, which is pretty ambiguous, so maybe you rubber band back to your previous save or checkpoint if you die in another universe. I can probably see some credence behind this possibility as the identity of the pilgrim, and thus all Starborn could be a meta-representation of the player. Third, the behavior of the Starborn in combat may just be arrogance or a limitation of the game, although one thing I feel like no one has brought up is why there are random Starborn assigned to defend temples or artifacts, suggesting either desire or punishment. What we definitively do know is that after a Starborn dies, we can collect their quantum essence, which allows us to use more powers at a greater pace for about a minute without waiting to gather more energy. We're not entirely sure if there's a real scientific equivalent to Starfield's quantum essence besides quantum materials, which is a whole different can of worms I don't want to get into. Starborn seem to often depend on pre-existing weaponry in a universe that they travel to, and this makes a lot of sense once you realize nothing material such as cred sticks, papers, weapons, quantum essences, or whatever you have on your person or your ship when grab jumping to the Unity cannot pass into another universe. Why that is may just be another lore video in the future. However, the only technology and equipment Starborn are outfitted with at the start of their entry into a new universe is their spacesuit and starship, with both being upgraded and enhanced with every pass through the Unity. Starships called the Starborn Guardian are given to us presumably by the Unity. It's unknown exactly what material the Starborn Guardians are made of, but we do know based on the dialogue of United Colonies and Freestar Collective, when we are scanned for contraband, people are unsure if scanners will even work on our ships.
Unregistered starship. We're detecting... well, it's what we're not detecting that's an issue. What's powering that thing? You know what, just hold still while we do the contraband check.
Turns out that they do work, so it may just be the commentary on the physical appearance of the Starborn Guardians, and also the readings and levels of power that are coming off of the ships. We also do know that they are at least serviceable or repairable by shipyard technicians, so the exterior material itself may not be completely foreign, or that's just a game design thing. One thing we also do know for a fact is that once a Starborn Guardian is destroyed, just like a Starborn individual, the ship also disintegrates into starlight or glimmering dust, leaving not a single trace of its existence behind. Starborn Guardians only get enhanced up to 6 times, and is still outfitted with what's considered to be C-class weapons, the highest tier. Solar flares are lasers, and gravity torpedoes are missiles. The technology behind both seem to go beyond current human technology, as gravity torpedoes seem to have a rather advanced targeting system, even if you completely miss a locked-on target. Meanwhile, the jump range of Starborn Guardians and their shield capacity can be quite insane, far outstripping human-made starships. The Starborn spacesuits, on the other hand, can be enhanced by going through the Unity up to 10 times in terms of stats, but also can change appearance such as parts or the addition of a cloak or tabard. No matter what variation of spacesuit you have as a Starborn, they are all of legendary quality, and nothing in the settled systems can come close to replicating or crafting these Starborn spacesuits. Interestingly, if we look at the list of the names of available Starborn spacesuits, we have Astra, Materia, Locus, Tenebris, Solus, Gravitas, Bellum, Tempest, Avitus, Venetor. All of these names have relations to the in-game lore of Starfield, mathematics, astrophysics, and qualities that refer to the progression of us spacefarers as we continue through the multiverse, with Venator or Hunter being an obvious reference to the Starborn we know as the Hunter. We can assume that the material of the Starborn spacesuits are similar to the material making up a large part of our ships, as the suits also disappear or disintegrate with Starborn when they seemingly die. The Starborn, apart from being intrinsically linked to the artifacts that make up an armillary required for grab jumps to reach the Unity, and the temples that host locations of powers, are not entirely knowledgeable with said objects and places. The Starborn are not the creators who, for whatever reason, placed these temples or artifacts, or even presumably created the multiverse, though the Unity hints we may meet them later on. perhaps most mysterious to the Starborn, are not exactly their abilities nor their technology, but it is what's behind their origins that eludes our speculation. Starborn can find artifacts of an armillary that point them to the locations of temples. Interacting with the artifacts can grant both Starborn and non-Starborn powers should they be susceptible to the effects of the artifacts, as not every human is. Powerful visions of harmonious music and what seems to be the lights of a part of the universe can appear in our minds. It's only later we learn, after we enter through the Unity ourselves, that just as the artifacts were pieces of an armillary, the visions too were pieces of what we see in the ending as players. It's made clear at this point, you don't have to go through the Unity to at least possess the ability to receive these visions or even the powers of the Starborn, which means a person accompanying a Starborn through the Unity starts out probably as a base level of a Starborn. Perhaps they don't possess powers yet, but they can start hunting for them in their new Starborn Guardian and spacesuit. Most interesting to us spacefarers is the question of what happens to the temples and the artifacts, assuming all 24 artifacts are used to construct an armillary on board a ship with a grav drive. The temples host large-sized spinning armillaries with engraved lightings, while they and the doors of the temples seem to only respond to the presence of Starborn, or people picked to be Starborn. Once we consume the enhancement or addition of a power from the temple seems to largely go dormant, with the large armillary not responding to any further stimulus. This may allude to the fact why competing Starborn are so desperate to fight over the artifacts and by extension, the temples, as either the temples have a one-time use per universe, or it takes a very long time for them to regain the energy to provide said powers. Perhaps the most curious temple is the buried temple on Masada 3 in the Masada star system, which is said to be, for whatever reason, close to the Unity.
It is close to the Unity. The artifact and the temple here are one, unlike the others you have found that are separated from each other.
The emissary even states that Artifact Mu and its associated temple in Masada 3 are one, unlike the others we found, which is rather vague and just conjures up more questions than answers. As for the artifacts themselves, it may be that they are reusable by the people who decide not to go through the Unity until a later time, as shown when we also back out of the Unity and talk to them, and also when the Unity often mentions our romance companions deciding to be reborn or go through the Unity later. So here, we can assume the artifacts remain on the ship should an occupant decide not to go through the Unity, and if everyone does go through, then the artifacts might just pull a Dragon Ball Z and simply rescatter across the settled systems. In addition to everything that we brought up so far, Starborn individuals also have access to what we will simply call powers. There's a total of 24 powers many of the Starborn we encounter can access. These powers have relations to cosmic forces such as stars, gravity, temperature, supernovas, the vacuum of space, and what seems to be an impossible alteration of the properties of matter itself. Starborn can reanimate dead creatures, summon parallel selves, or others through the multiverse, create resistance to radiation, manipulate gravity to not only move at greater frictionless speed, but also create anchors or loss of gravity upon their enemies. Starborn can also use their powers to produce outward explosions of energy, like a supernova, create vacuums devoid of oxygen in an area, be able to predict the near future, be able to detect nearby life forms, create antimatter for shields, and even slow either time or perception of time down. Needless to say, these powers are quite impressive and can be absolutely devastating for hostile creatures, even if the Starborn are unarmed. What's most interesting is that these powers scale off of the power level of a Starborn, and this is deeply hinted by Victor Isa, presumably meeting his Starborn self for 12 days of lost time, whereas Barrett, who gains the power shortly after, can only hold a connection to one of his parallel selves for a short time or for the duration of a short firefight. It's also notable that when we go to Hyla 2, when pursuing the trail of the Pilgrim, we see these otherwise hostile and territorial creatures line up in a sort of ceremonial procession at the site of the clue. This means the Pilgrim, who is Keeper Aquilus in the starting universe, is still alive, maintaining control over these creatures, and considering the light years in distance between Alpha Centauri and Hyla 2, that's quite impressive. Of course, this also means once a Starborn is extinguished physically, their powers also stop lingering and having effect. This is backed up by when we are storming the buried temple, and if we kill the Starborn known as Guardian ApoAlaia, her necromantic control over the dead ecliptic mercenaries disappears, and they drop dead. However, the most devastating and amazing power a Starborn may possess is actually what happens when they go through the Unity to the next universe.
In order to become Starborn, you must give the universe one last thing. Yourself. That intangible part of you, that something that makes you unique amongst the infinite, will explode like a supernova. A part of you will fuse with the essence of this universe, while another part leaves it behind forever. Do you understand what I mean? This one final leap will change this universe forever, even as you leave it behind.
When the Unity tells us that we leave a part of ourselves in the previous universe in order to advance to the next universe, that part we leave behind explodes like a supernova. It is not the deeds of what we've done that affect the universe we're leaving as you think it normally would, such as our mundane example of, say, a politician's policy on history or the welfare of others. But it is far more powerful than that. Our intent, our ethos, our desires quite literally manifest in some unseen influence that changes people's natures or dispositions. For a simpler analogy, we are a computer virus, and once we upload a part of ourselves to the universe, that part spreads and affects everything in that universe. This universe-spanning power actually gives a greater and clearer context as to why the emissary is so motivated to deter the hunter and other dangerous Starborn or individuals from reaching the Unity. And it makes so much sense because the hunter or whatever Starborn on the grand scale of things don't really seem to kill too many people. If a dangerous Starborn or the hunter uploads a part of themselves, then that universe, at least in the eyes of the emissary, is quite literally ruined. People become less nice, more driven for power, and so on. And this has really interesting implications because what happens if another person goes through the Unity after somebody else? Does that universe again need to be molded by that person's different intents and ethos? Or is the first one through the Unity in that universe just determine that universe? Something definitely worth thinking about. One power I think I will mention here that a lot of people seem to think the Starborn possess is the ability to time travel, and they don't. I think it's an understandable misconception as people may be confusing entering a different universe with an entirely different timeline with the previous universe that has its own timeline. Just because you're going from the year 2330 in Universe A to the year 2000 in Universe B, that's not exactly time travel, it's just an entirely different universe with a completely different timeline of events that may or may not have ever occurred, independent of the existence of any other universe. To put this into perspective, imagine two papers on top of one another, almost exactly, that represent two different universes. If the pen is a Starborn and we poke it through any point on these layers, and we come out on the other sides, it looks pretty similar. But imagine if the paper on top or bottom is shifted. Obviously, while we enter from the same point on the first side we penetrate, we come out on a different point on the other side. That's basically what happens, and may also explain that previously mentioned Hunter's dialogue about his time on Earth. Unlike what we've uncovered in our lore video about House Varun, there isn't exactly a societal or cultural order to the Starborn. Warlike and conflict-driven may be the closest descriptors for the Starborn as a collective species rather than them having an organized hierarchy, government, or religious institutions. We know based on the dialogue we have with the Starborn known as a traitor, or who many of you may know as the mysterious captain, the life of a Starborn can be fraught with violence and bloodshed, and few seem to be able to escape the multiversal reality of said violence. Even the less physical Starborn, such as the entrepreneurial Starborn mentioned that had built a complex over the buried temple in Masada, seems to have a penchant for violence and manipulation. It seems most Starborn are pretty much out for themselves and often form necessary alliances when called for. There doesn't seem to be any sort of government, but rather ideology that some Starborn can rally under, such as the ideology of the hunter or the emissary. Starborn seem to either like traveling alone or in packs, as we noticed when we encountered them during our competition for the artifacts and temples. While biologically and outwardly they appear to be a different species that have physically ascended beyond normal humans, they feel just as human at times in terms of their behaviors and some of their desires for control or power. Before we continue with this part of the video, it's important that we understand that the personal identities of the Starborn we'll be discussing are trivial or almost irrelevant to the lore due to the nature of an infinite multiverse with infinite possibilities running on non-linear time. We need to look at the Pilgrim, for example, as not just Keeper Aquilus even in our starting universe, but as a mantle or ideology of what they represent. Same goes for the Hunter and the Emissary. It just doesn't matter who they are, it matters what they believe in and what they do as a result of their beliefs. The Emissary is Starborn that believe only those deemed worthy or not as power-driven as the Hunter are the ones who should interact with the Unity and become Starborn. They view this gatekeeping, which they try to fulfill at all costs, similar to how the Hunter hunts the artifacts and the powers at all costs, as a justified action due to what happens with the universe when someone aggressive or conflict-driven go through the Unity, as we discussed earlier when we were going over the powers. Interestingly, if we do side with the Emissary in some universes, they tend to stay behind to take care of the universe if we go through the Unity, as they are probably expecting the part of ourselves we leave behind to make it easier for them to guide the peoples of the settled systems. They don't seem interested in pursuing powers like the Hunter, and only seem to do so out of perceived necessity. It's hard to say if the Emissary is morally good, whatever that may mean, but it's certain that they have an entirely different drive from the Hunter in their pursuit of the artifacts. The Hunter is Starborn, who upholds the ideals of winner takes all, or rather you take whatever you want, if you can, as fast as possible. The Hunter believes in the ultimate free will of any being to do what they desire, whether that's going after more powers or what have you. They are often disgusted with the apparent hypocrisy of the Emissary's ideals, wherein the Emissary is preventing people's free will in pursuing what they desire, as the Emissary often uses the same methods of the Hunter, at least on the scale of violence. The Hunter is not morally bad, whatever that may also mean, just as the Emissary is not morally good. The Unity indeed confirms all of this, as it says,
"The Hunter is reborn once again. His ethic of expediency and individual will spreads throughout the universe he leaves behind. Many will find the courage to rise and seize power from those who have it, for good or ill."
The Pilgrim is Starborn, who both precedes and succeeds the Hunter. One can be the Pilgrim by accepting what they view as their place in the multiverse, whether that's going through the Unity or settling in a universe. The main difference between the Hunter and the Pilgrim is not how many times they go through the Unity, but why they go through the Unity and do what they do. The Hunters often view the Pilgrims as their lessers, or ones too weak to have kept going through another 20 New Game Pluses to attain greater heights of power. The Pilgrim is sort of a bodhisattva figure in both journey and mindset. That is, a person within Buddhism who has achieved their awakening, or in this case, the learning of the universe or the Unity, but stays behind to guide others to it, even if that means to suffer more. This is shown by Keeper Aquilus deciding to form the Sanctum Universum, and steadily teaching the importance of grab jumps and the search for the Unity, or God as they call it. The traitor is Starborn, who decided that they are tired of the endless and perhaps pointless conflict in the multiverse that often take place between the countless other Starborn. They cruise through the Black Sea of space, leisurely, sometimes running into Starborn such as we spacefarers, sometimes just spending time away as a common traveler. Not much else is really known about the traitor apart from their refusal to participate directly in the Starborn conflict, and they seem to have just made a peaceful and comfortable living for themselves. The last two prominent Starborn are pure speculation and my own theories on who they are, so please don't take it too seriously. When we are fighting through the buried temple, one of the anomalous time-space rifts we can go through has us end up on the Scow, a scavenging and antiquity collecting ship commanded by Captain Petrov. No matter what dialogue option we choose, Captain Petrov turns quite sinister, and even realizes that we are after the artifacts, even though in our starting universe, he didn't realize what they were, which either speaks to the infinite volume of possibilities in the multiverse, or somehow the anomalous rifts are influenced by more malicious forces, such as the other Starborn we're fighting, although I find the latter highly unlikely. He even refers to the life we've led, and that's more than credits that the Unity will demand of us, which obviously implies Petrov, at least in other universes, is a Starborn, or at least someone who knows of the Unity, as his body doesn't disappear like a Starborn's. Whatever the case, it is interesting that he is also referred to as the Collector, which follows the nomenclature system of the Starborn, like the Emissary, the hunter, the trader, and so on. I discussed the possibility of the Great Serpent being that interacted with Jinan Varun being a potential Starborn, or a Starborn Jinan Varun of some kind in another lore video if you guys want to check that out. To sum it up, there is a possibility based on the clues we pick up in regards to the mythos of House Varun's founding, Jinan's duel with the Unbeliever, and the Great Serpent's claims that the Great Serpent could be a Starborn, or it being associated with the creators. But again, this is all conjecture at this point until the Shattered Space DLC, and the only other thing going for this theory is again the nomenclature of the Great Serpent being equivalent to the Hunter and so on. As we discussed earlier in the video when going over the societal and cultural structures of the Starborn as a collective, there are Starborn who do work in probably temporary alliances with either the Hunters or the Emissaries when we take the fight to them at the Buried Temple. Guardian ApoAlaia seems to be named after Queen Athaliah of Judah, who claimed the descent from King David, and didn't exactly have a happy ending. Guardian ApoAlaia doesn't get a happy ending either, at least in our universes when we fight. She seems to have great control over reanimating and using dead ecliptic mercenaries against us. She also has the ability to swap places with any of her controlled minions should she feel pressured. Guardian Musa's main namesake could have been referenced to the Musa mentioned in the Quran, who had a role as a prophet. Not sure if there's any solid connection here so far with these names, but it's worth noting that Musa has great mastery over summoning multiple parallel selves for an extended amount of time, which speaks to her power as a Starborn. Guardian Rin, along with Guardian Toda, the latter which seems to have been named after the Illyrian Queen Toda, who once entered conflict with the Roman Republic, possesses the ability of Supernova and Gravity Well, which when combined can certainly put on some fireworks. Guardian Fion seems to have an aptitude for melee combat, oftentimes possessing a Varun Pain Blade. Fion is also quite skilled at summoning multiple inner demons, that is, the parallel versions of their enemies, to fight on their behalf, which makes him quite dangerous, often forcing escalations of parallel cells and inner demons, producing a bloody battlefield. Cora, or rather a version of Cora as a Starborn, can be encountered in one of the many universes we go to after communing with the Unity. She's surrounded by mercenaries who are in mining suits and accuses us spacefarers of being responsible for the death of her father, Zak W. Obviously, it may have been another version of us, or maybe it was us that had decided to not help Zak W over another Constellation member when the Hunter attacked. Regardless, Cora Coe as an adult Starborn seems to have been hunting the multiverse for any Starborn version of us, despite a different Zak W telling her revenge is not worth it. There are other Starborn that seem to randomly appear at the sites of artifacts or at temples, with the Temple Starborn sharing the names of the temples such as Guardian Psi, Guardian Alpha, and so on, after the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet, which also correspond to the 24 artifacts that make up the armillary. Why 24 or the Greek alphabet is used, I'm not sure. The nature of the Guardians spawning at temples or artifacts seem odd. Perhaps they are Starborn who are somehow inexplicably tied to the temples or pulled from through the multiverse to combat whoever is hunting down these powers. Or they could just be part of a different Starborn mantle where they believe in completely different ideals separate from the hunter or emissary. Or they could just simply be an inevitable game mechanic, who knows, but I find it funny that not many in the community have brought up these Starborn in particular. While there is no definite society, culture, or religion among the Starborn, I find it important to point to some of the interpretations and meanings we can derive from the very existence of the Starborn presented to us within Starfield and the potential influences that had a hand in Bethesda's writing for the Starborn. In the Writers of Keeper Aquilus, notably Sanctum Universum Volume 2 and A Greater End Volume 3, the Keeper writes the following: "Recall our prime maxim that all people by nature desire to know, and so from this blankness we ask questions. Who are my parents? What is justice? Why do stars twinkle? Should I pursue a romantic relationship?" All of these inquiries are ways of knowing, and ways of thinking, and ways of acting, and underlying all of it is the reality that we share. For ultimately, all questions eventually become some sort of why. Why did my parents abandon me? Why was this injustice committed? Why was I rejected? And whys have a way of coalescing towards a unified point. Your parents abandoned you because of their addictions, which came from their hardships, which came from their unjust society, which is formed out of scarcity, which is a consequence of mineral distribution on the planet. which derives from the relative weights of various elements in a molten protoplanet, which is correlated with their atomic mass, which relates to the interaction of subatomic particles, which, and so proceed ad infinitum, but not quite, because ultimately there is an epistemic barrier beyond which we can no longer ask why. Why does anything exist at all? Unity in its facet of being, responsible for all other things in the universe, even if it takes no more intentional role in them than the soul does in the plant. Unity is not mere soil. While all beings will one day return to it, unity actually craves a return. It does not directly seek it, nor bring it about. Ascribing such machinations and will would be absurdly redundant. Something that exists beyond the flow of time has no need to hasten any process which derives from itself. From these excerpts, we can sense a presentation of reality in terms of gradients that, when we inspect them normally in our everyday lives, seem quite far apart, whether we're talking about the difference between a human and a plant or a cat and a bug. Ultimately, however, these differences are not truly there, as all things from the atoms to the stars are gradients of the same thing, which in this case is the universe, or a concept of being or existence. Eventually, as the keeper points out, we are out of the whens, hows, wheres, whos, whats, and then the whys, because in the end, these questions are just redundant once we realize that we are all part of one another. The keeper's commentary about the nature of unity and just being, and not some sort of interfering divinity or entity that desires itself, speaks to this point. I would definitely say that there is a considerable amount of Buddhist and Hindu influence in the keeper's commentary. While the philosophy and thoughts behind these words has less to do with the Buddhist idea of samsara and the breaking out of the cycle of suffering and rebirth, as essentially the unity represents that rebirth, or at least continuation of individual existence as starborn and thus suffering, I would go so far as to put forth the Buddhist Sutta of Ajivachagata as an influence here, where it said, "The position that the cosmos is internal is a thicket of views, a wilderness of views, a contortion of views, a writhing of views, a fetter of views. It is accompanied by suffering, distress, despair, and fever, and it does not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, to calm, direct knowledge, full awakening, unbinding. A position is something that an awakened one has done away with. This fire that has gone out in front of you, in which direction from here has it gone? East, west, north, or south? Any feeling, any perception, any fabrication, any consciousness by which one describing an awakened one wouldn't apply. Freed from the classification of consciousness, being awakened is deep, boundless, hard to fathom, like the sea. Reappears doesn't apply. Does not reappear doesn't apply. Both does and does not reappear doesn't apply. Neither reappears nor does not reappear doesn't apply. The other ideas presented by the keeper align as well with the older ideas of Hinduism, where you are not necessarily seeking to become one with the Brahman or the universe, but rather realizing you are already and have always been one with Brahman or the universe. What happens when Starborn go through the unity? Are they really separate from the rest of us? The rest of existence simply because they are given powers or unique properties? No, they are simply becoming or realizing that they are one with the unity rather than distinguishing themselves from it. And the same goes for the unity or the universe, where they are already one with the Starborn and the rest of us. The Keeper's last comments in A Greater End Volume 3 allude to the Starborn and what he perceives to be their role in this thicket of the universe. We have no way of fully understanding the divine apart from his choice to reveal itself. The unity does not do directly. No, an immediate encounter with it would drive the unprepared mind to shattered weeping. As the unity craves our encounter, though, it does on occasion emanate messengers to aid us in our trajectory. These emanations appear to us in forms that we can understand, as corporeal beings that are like us but unlike us, similar enough to be accepted by our minds, but different enough that they maintain a knowledge of the unity. These are our guides, like sailors of old steering their ships by stars, like the fulcrum of Archimedes' lever, like the seed value which initiates a matrix simulation. Those born of the stars give us fixed points amidst chaos. With their wisdom, we can seize the path of our fates, no longer being subject to the whims of physical processes. Instead of waiting our destruction, we can sail straight to the eye of the storm and emerge on the other side with our own hard-won betterment. Seek those born of the stars, for they are themselves lights in the void. There are two major takeaways from this part. First, the Keeper views the Starborn, regardless of their morality, their actions, and so forth, as agents or messengers meant to guide the rest of humanity. Through existing and by revelation of their existence, the Starborn can be a catalyst for the advancement of humanity to the point where more and more people can go through the Unity. It's clear that the Keeper strongly believes the Starborn perhaps may also grow to becoming these guides more proactively, as refers to their wisdom, implying that there may come a time when more and more Starborn continue to go through the journey of the Hunter and the Pilgrim to arrive at a similar conclusion the Keeper has come to. Secondly, it's insinuated by the Keeper that the Starborn are purposely left intact as humanoid beings, so the whole process of guiding humans will be met with less resistance or fear on their way to the Unity. This brings a lot more questions up then about what we've covered about the Starborn earlier in terms of their physiology and abilities, but also what the creators have to do with some of this, or how any of this would apply to other lifeforms out there that aren't human but are equally or more intelligent. But I'm sure that'll be a different video in another universe. There's a lot more we don't know yet about the Starborn, and even less we know about the creators that the Unity mentions. This was a really fun subject to delve into, and I appreciate all of your support. If you want to support me, you can subscribe to the channel or check out my personal Patreon, linked in the video description. In the meantime, if you want to discuss more lore or give me recommendations, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all out there in the Starfield.